Oneness and Wellness. We have two guests that have been with us before. The subject is vortex healing. Welcome, Marsha Reddington Lawton, my old partner. Not old in
Old too, be careful
fine.
about that. But no, never.
Old
never.
in my heart. And we also have Lorraine Goldblum, and she has been the real incentive around vortex healing.
Oh.
Part A, the first program, is about shame, and there's Part A and Part B. So make sure you stay with us and keep watching. So I'm going to turn this over to Marsha and Lorraine. We have an audience with us today.
We do.
And they will be speaking up at different times during the program. So it should be very interesting. So we're talking about shame.
We're talking about shame. We're talking about it.
We're talking about it.
And I think it's important to talk about it. So thank you. Thank you so much for having me back on. It's so nice to see you again. I love our little chats, you know. I really do.
Great subject.
It's an important subject. And what I wanted to do, I talk a lot about vortex healing. I'm a vortex healing teacher. And I go around and I talk about the nature of vortex healing, what it is, and I offer demonstrations and healings. And I really enjoy doing it. But I find where people really resonate, where it really makes sense to people, is when they can relate to what we're trying to work on. When it touches us, when we realize how healing can affect us and touch us, where we feel hurt, where we feel in separation, and when we realize that we share some common issues as just being part of the human race. So I wanted to do something called the issue series, where I sort of take different issues that I know that we all have and put them under a microscope and really sort of take a look at them, where they show up, how they manifest in our lives, what they look like in our personality, where they show up in the body, in the human energy system, and then what to do about that. Because really what an issue is, any issue is a way that we experience ourselves in separation. Right? And we've talked about this before. An issue is anything that keeps us out of being present, right? And I want to be here, or I want to share with you all, but if I have something going on in myself, if I'm nervous or anxious about being on here or all that,
stress.
The stress, anxiety, insecurity, these are all issues, and they keep me in an experience of just being myself, and I have to navigate that. I'm in an experience of personal self, and I'm trying to be here and be present and enjoy the moment. That's very hard when I have an issue going on.
Right.
So I thought, wouldn't it be great if we just put certain issues under the microscope and talk about them? One, because it once we begin to understand something, it takes the mystery out of it. And then we begin to share and realize that we're not in the isolated state that we believe we are. As a matter of fact, we never were. You know, it opens the door to not just vortex healing, but healings on all levels. And when I sat down to make my list of issues, and I have a long list of issues, the one I realized that you kind of have to start with, that I keep coming back to, is shame. Because when you think about things that keep you in an experience of separation, shame has got to be up there at the top of the list. Right? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I just finished reading a book in 2 days called The Girlfriend.
Mm.
And it's all about her shame about being poor.
Yes, absolutely.
And how she tries to get out of that and lies because she doesn't want to be seen as being poor.
That's right. And we all have shame. It looks different in different people. It manifests, but it's an incredibly deep-seated issue. It can look like anything, is my experience in looking at it in myself and other people, because it is a way we mask what we don't want, not only other people seeing, but ourselves to see. So very often it can look like anger or resentment or the need to be perfect. And all of these are ways that we tend to compensate, right, for what we don't want to see. And by nature, shame hides. It hides from ourselves. And here is our focus on trying to be whatever we think we should be. And there's a lot of tension in projecting that to the world and to other people. And that thing that needs love, that piece of separation consciousness that doesn't feel worthy of connection or being loved or belonging, never gets what it needs. It stays hidden. You know, there's a wonderful, I don't know if you've ever heard of Brene Brown. Mm-hmm. She does wonderful work on shame. I think she defines herself as a shame researcher, and she's done a number of books and all of that. And she has, I think, the best definition of shame that I've ever heard about, which is guilt is really feeling bad about something you've done, but shame is feeling bad about something you are. And I think that's beautifully said. It's a place where you shut down, right? And you hide from the world. And then you can't connect and you can't be present.
One of the things while we're all listening to your words about shame, I would like to invite everybody to ask the question to themselves while they're listening to you, is what would I be without shame? Because there's a wealth of information you have, and when we bring it to ourselves, what would I be without my shame, as we listen to your wisdom, I think that really deepens the impact and the importance of the subject.
Absolutely. And again, shame is a magnificent example of separation consciousness. Because if we didn't have that, if we felt open and we had a willingness to be vulnerable with the world, well, you know, then we could, the potential is endless. But so long as we feel the need to hide and compensate, it just grows in on itself. And I found, working in my own system with my own shame, I realized that I put a lot of effort into projecting this image I want to the world, right? I don't want to be seen for what I actually am because I'm afraid that that's not good enough for fill in the blank, right? And then so I project this image of who I want to be. And one of two things happen. Either it works or it doesn't. So if it doesn't work, well, then that, you know, and then you feel bad because you've failed or whatever. But then if it does work, that creates a whole set of problems, because then you're being met for the projection you've created and not who you really are. So I realized that part of me felt like a fraud. Does that make sense? Because I was projecting an image of myself of who I wanted to be, or who I thought, better said, who I thought I should be, right? And then if that worked well, then part of me felt, well, then that's what's being loved. And of course, I fall short of that. So all of that work goes there.
Right. Well, that makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. Now, you've done a lot of work on yourself. Mm-hmm. And you certainly have done a lot of work on this issue of issues.
Yes.
And what are issues. I think a lot of people, I tell you, I was lying in bed with my husband this morning, and his issue, he said, he was angry with me last night, upset with me, I would say, because he's a very sweet man. But he said, I said, what's the real issue? He couldn't name it. Yeah. And I think maybe when you've done work, and certainly for our viewing audience, if you're paying attention, you'll learn something, and maybe even in future time take a course in vortex healing.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, this is our gig. This is what we do. You know, we bring awareness to where and how separation consciousness sits in the system and wakes it up out of the story. Because the truth is that we're never actually in separation. You know, that's the only way we can come out of it. We realize we were never actually there. And that's what we call awakening, right? We don't, you know, go somewhere or become something that we weren't. We realize the truth of what we are.
Could you explain, I'm sorry, the system, awakens, it's in the system. Could you define what that means?
Yes, thank you. I get in the habit of using that word. When I'm talking about the system, I'm not just talking about the physical body. I'm talking about the entire package that goes with it. I'm talking about the chakra system, the body pathways, the energetic bodies. All of this comes together in a package to basically allow the divine to have an experience of separation. This is beautifully designed. It's a wondrous, intricate, no, it's amazing. It's an amazing system for the divine to experience itself as if it were something separate. And our issues show up in this. They show up in our minds, our personalities. You can see it in the chakra system. You can see it in the pathways. And they all imprint and are held together, our issues, by this separation consciousness. So healing is really about not only releasing that from where it sits in the body and the system, but it's about awakening that separation consciousness, right? It's about realizing that's not actually true. You are not disconnected from the world around you. That's just the experience. Which doesn't diminish the experience, right, but it's just not true. And the realization that we never were disconnected is the awakening. So that's why it's well worth our time to look at our issues, especially something like shame that works so well hidden. If you bring that to the light, and you bring that divine consciousness to it, you don't just release it or get better. You realize, well, that's never the case. And that's really, vortex healing is a lineage about awakening. It functions as a healing modality, and people get better from physical issues, emotional issues, psychological. But the awakening is really where the healing comes in. That's how we work.
Because a healing without an awakening to a bigger truth,
right,
is so limited.
Absolutely. And I can talk about awakening, and I love to talk about awakening. I do it all the time. But it doesn't necessarily mean anything unless you know where you're coming from. The question you asked so beautifully, what would you be without your shame? You know, we start from the experience of separation, and that's what we all relate to, right? So then where do we go from that? How do we deal with that? And so we bring our vortex healing tools and our supportive, loving friends and our therapy, or all the wonderful things that we do for ourselves, shine a light on that, realize it for what it is. It's just an experience. It's not the truth of what we are, and then move into a different way.
Right. Well, you know, this whole issue of shame, since I had the notes and was knowing what you were going to talk about today, I started thinking about, all right, so what is in your life, what is the shame?
Yeah.
And I realized something that I have been working on for maybe the past 5 years, and finally came to a place where I could openly talk about it. But it took time.
It takes time, and it takes some courage, doesn't it?
Courage, absolutely.
You got to sit down and be willing to, you know, have the vulnerability to say, okay, this is what I'm really afraid of. And humility, in my experience, to take a look at how it's held me in the past, how it feels now, and what it would look like going forward in the future, and be willing to make a change.
And I don't want to make a sexist remark, but I know that women are much more willing to look at their lives. Not to say that men aren't, but
I think they are, but I think they do it in a different way. I've talked to women about their issues of shame, and I've talked to men. And very often, I'm generalizing, but a lot of the women, you know, the way they kind of compensate and manage that issue is they're trying to be perfect, and they're a little more willing to share on an emotional level. And the men that I've talked to, you know, their shame is their compensations very often, they don't want to appear weak. And expressing yourself on an emotional level can be perceived as a sign of weakness.
Plus, hold that thought. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back with this very interesting conversation, and we'll start with you, Masha. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lorraine Goldblum, and I'm excited to share with you something we're calling the Issue Series, which is a series of episodes here on Oneness and Wellness where we're exploring issues, how we get held in separation, and how do we come out of it. So please stay tuned for episodes coming up.
So what I was going to say about emotions, which we all have, and it's such a tricky and loaded topic, women were shamed for having them, and men were shamed for having them as well. We're just getting to a point where we're broaching the power of emotions to play in our lives. So we're all, I think, challenged in that way. And when you consider emotions being such a creative life force within, it's a huge topic. So I just want to say, I think we're just awakening to the power of our emotions.
Oh, absolutely. And I think with men, the men that I've talked to, what they've offered as their experience, it's very interesting. I never thought about it from this perspective, is that they offered, this man in particular said that he felt like he wanted his partner at one point for him to express, vulnerability, but only to a certain extent. That if it went past a certain point, then it would be weakness. You see what I mean? And I thought that was brilliant because I never thought about it from a man's point of view, the line between just being emotionally present and willing to share to weak, to the perception of being weakness. And I think that's very interesting and very difficult for men in that way. So we all have our ways of hiding and compensating and working with it.
It's difficult for women too. I think that
It's,
weakness,
yeah,
for
absolutely.
sure, especially in the times we're living in. Women are asked to do multiple tasks and be strong. That's the way to see
Absolutely.
yourself. Be strong
And in every level, as
Right,
as a
exactly.
mother, as a
with your job, in the house, outside of the house.
right, in work, you're supposed to be ambitious. You're supposed to be that, and we're so afraid that we're not everything. And that's our shame, that we're not everything. And, that's the social norm that we feel we need to compensate to. And who is everything?
Right.
No one's everything.
Until we are awakened.
So it's pulling back from all of that. It's really looking at the healing and working with the healing so that we can be our real self,
Right.
our authentic selves.
And taking a look at where we've shut down. What are we trying to hide from ourselves and from everyone else? What is the thing we're afraid to see? Where is the point where we're afraid to be vulnerable? If we're willing to put that in the spotlight with whatever we're doing, vortex healing is wonderful because it works with consciousness, not just energy, or therapy, to just get it out in the light, share with people you trust. This is the way things move, and we realize that we were never actually disconnected. Then that's the awakening, is realizing that we were never in separation, that our issues were just an experience of being in separation. We never actually were. That's why we talk about awaken, we use that word as if it were a dream. If you go to sleep and you have a dream that you're in a drama or that you're a kangaroo, you don't transform into something else when you wake up. You realize you were never actually that. You just had an experience. So basically the divine is having an experience being us. And being us
Sounds like you, Marcia.
with our issues, right? And then we awaken out of that to realize we were never actually in separation.
It's kind of a nice thought. If you're paying attention, audience, you'll maybe understand that a little bit better. And that's a really nice way to think about ourselves.
Yeah.
Truly inspiring.
Right.
So where's the biggest juice in shame?
Where is the biggest juice in shame? It's the fact that it hides and it really shuts the system down. It's almost a place where we stop breathing because we can put the focus, I'm going to work on my insecurity issue. I'm going to work on my anger issue. I'm going to work on, you're drawn to work to the ways that we compensate for the issue, never even realizing that shame is driving it, which is why I wanted to start with shame, because it's an issue I'm going to keep referring back to as I talk about other issues, that so many other things are compensating for the belief that we are not worthy of being connected or being part of the group or being loved. And then we resent that, we get angry, we feel lost. A lot of our other stuff comes from this fundamental belief that was never actually true. So the juice in shame is that it hides. And it takes a willingness and the courage that we talked about to sit down and take a look at that and see, okay, what is this for me? And how do I compensate for this? And how do I actually bring this to light and feel safe enough to do it and bring about that shame, that shame issue to the light?
Well, I hope we'll also be able to talk about some personal experiences, because I think that will help the audience to, we'll get it to a level where they say, oh, I understand that. So this was something that happened to you, and, I think that's helpful for
Yes.
people, that we break it down a little bit.
Mhm.
So I don't know if we have time right now, but I know that we're going to have a part B of shame, and we should be able to do that in.
Yeah, great. I do, it is interesting to look at experience in life. And very often, we are willing to share the moments in life where we felt humiliated or embarrassed, because very often those are things that happened to us. They're not necessarily our fault. So we can share those because we'll know we'll get sympathy for them. But it's much harder to talk about those things that we really feel deep inside. So yes, I agree. It's worth sort of putting it out there and see what that really looks like on the inside. Sometimes we really believe we're sharing that, but we're not. It takes a while to get to the heart of it.
Well, that's interesting, too.
Yeah. One of the things that we've been talking about is the courage. And fundamental to courage in my world is self-love.
Mm-hmm.
And when we commit to loving ourselves,
Yeah.
that gives us courage.
Yeah, yeah.
And so are we important enough to do this yucky work to set ourselves free?
Yeah,
And that comes from self-love,
yeah. Because we're worth it.
because we're worth it. Absolutely.
And if we have that for ourselves, then we can recognize the people who feel the same way about us. And if we feel safe enough, we can tackle anything. But
Well, it's this topic is really very, very interesting, and I think that people who are watching it will find it also important for their lives, for changes in their lives. So we're going to be doing. My friend over there is rattling his hands, which means that we're still talking. So.
we're going to be doing more. And it's good because this needs time. This is a juicy topic.
I'll tell you my shame issue, and then we can go from there. Maybe talk about it later in the second one. So the shame is, as a kid, I knew exactly what I wanted to do and what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Yeah.
My father had different issues. It was an age when fathers determined what you were going to do, what you were going to be, how life was going to be. And so when it came to going to college, I didn't have the power at that time to say, listen, be quiet. I'll find a way to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
So he said, no, my friend is, he's the president of the Teachers College. That's where you're going to school. And I've lived with that. I was ashamed. It was
Yeah.
ashamed. And so when people talked about their background and their college education, it was a shame for me.
Yeah.
Always felt that shame.
Yeah.
And not until the last few years was I able to really talk about it and say, hey, I went on.
Yeah.
I got another degree.
Mhm.
I went someplace else. I'm doing okay. I'm out in the world. I feel good about myself. But it was a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, so you can talk about that. I want our viewing audience to know this is part 1 of a 2-part series on shame. So stay with us, and Masha and Lorraine will be back shortly. Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste.